So that's built. Let's go after the repository, because this is where we need some of the logics that we need. So repository is an interface. That means that is a class abstraction. So let's call this add repository. There we go. And we will call it public interface book repository. There we go. Extends CRUD repository. So as I have already pointed out in some of the videos, this part we have a generic type. So if you see that T or E, and then this will be long, that's the ID, or usually in samples you would see that ID. So that means you have type long, and then the generic part is whatever you're creating the object class. So whatever that class is, that goes here. Whatever model you create, or that's table model entity, that name comes here because you want to loop through those and find the data from the table. So you're going to retrieve data from that class, and you want to do calculation on this object, which becomes an object later once you instantiate it. So we have type book, that's the generic part because we created the class, and that's the long, which we will associate this with the future ID. I would not explain it here, but just take a look at this long versus this long. So it's gonna help you some of the stuff in future. You can definitely use other data types, but it makes life easier. So let's do, what do we want to do? We want to retrieve all the books that's in the database. So that would be list Java util, and list of what? List of all these books. So that's the API interface that's gonna hold all these book objects. So that's like list object, and we want to call a method kind find all, and that will iterate through all the tables. So that's pretty much means that select all from books. That's all it is. And take a look at this CRUD repository API. So all these have methods which are already implemented behind the scene. So when you use this repository, it's gonna implement all those that's needed. And yeah, just Google search it, or let me show you just a brief. So I don't want you to have this idea of like I'm skipping most of these things. So it's just like CRUD repository Spring Boot. Let me see which one has the ones that we know. So these are all the methods. It's an interface, so generic type ID, and these are all implemented inside. So these are there. The method signature is there. You would add the body later in services to do all these calculation or operations. So what it does is once you extend this interface, that means that you don't have to make these manually. You don't have to do all these coding by yourself. You just use them and it will connect to it. So these are some samples there. Take a look at that if you would like. But for now, let's build our application. And if you use SQL, you always have something similar to this. And that will be like select. Doesn't matter actually in SQL. Select all from books where ID equals to 100. So if you do this command, it will give you a full data, like name will be, for example, John, and like salary, for example, like 400. So it will take all the columns from the table. That means that's an object translated into a table inside a database. So that's our entity here. When we do this command, it's gonna go loop through this one. So we are safe from doing all the SQL commands in the Spring Boot framework. So let's do for this one, the lovely one, optional, and we would say take a list of all books and do it find by ID. You can add optional, but I don't have to. So that's long type ID. So that's the type ID, and that's the book. So we integrated the ID, but it's the same. All these methods are implemented in the repository. We just modify them to use it. So we have these two. If you just in case want to do something extra, for example, I want a list of books, for example, find by name, then you would do, for example, a string, and that name must match what you have in the class. So for example, title. String. So sometimes when this name doesn't match with the table, like if you put just search, it gives you problem. To save you that problem, usually make sure that when you put something find by name, that means that choose a field from your database, like do you want to search by title or you want to search by author name. So whatever you want to do, but it has to be, it's best to be one from the table to work for you. So this, the repository side is done, and now we are gonna go to service side. That's where we want to put all the logic. And it's the middleware. We don't, as I said, we don't need this one. Package, there we go, get all of this. The annotation is a service. Public class book service. So in this, I need to import this one. In this tutorial, the only thing that we have as an interface is the repository. So sometime when you do this, practice it, you forget that this is interface. And sometimes as a student, we just type at class because we're used to it. But that's one thing you want to pay attention to. That's an interface. All others are classes, and we know that in Java, objects communicate with each other because we create those communications. So to connect service with book repository, because right now they don't know each other, they are strangers, we first do that. We say book repository, and we call it book repository. Let's make it short, but let's say private. So the access modifier or accessify, access modifier. So for this one, we have the data type. What is the data type? That's the repository. That's an interface, and we created one from it. So it's the same thing. When you see something similar, just repeat it in your brain. It's like private object type new object. It's like something similar to this one. And or you have, for example, int age. It's just something similar. So we have a class, and you know everything in an object is in Java is a class, and objects are created from a class. So this is similar to this one, but integer only holds the value, but this one has methods and properties. So that's like the inside repository. We have all these methods, so we want to use that. We want to have access to it. And since we did this, we have to build a constructor for this one, and that will be public book service. And what do you want in constructor to have access? The repository. So let's do book repository and book repo. This dot book repository repo equals to book repo. So again, this book is pointing to this one, and this is that one. Excuse me. So now we have access to that one. The first thing we want to do in web application, when I use JSP, usually I build the read part first because I want to see what is in the table. I create that manually inside the table, then I extract that data. But in here, I will do the create first. So I want to create an object first, then I want to see what the object is. So the first part is public void, because I don't want to have any value to be returned to me. Otherwise, you can choose the value itself if you want it. And you can either, like, once you see, like, for example, setter and getter, all you should think is setter is writing, getter is reading. But when you have like a setter with a return, that means that it writes and gives you what it has written in the system. So for the first part, all we say is, what do you want to create? I want to create a book. Create a book. What is the type? So definitely it's book. So I'm going to call it book. The capital one is the object. I need to import this one. So I just want to point out, I can say new book, but just similar to these things. So the first one is, I want to create a class or an object from this book with all these things. That's what I'm pointing at. And here I'm saying that create a book, and I'm giving it a new name, like it's an object. But how to create this? Call the book repository, because I didn't write any method of writing a book, did I? No. So I'm gonna say call book repo, because I have instantiated in the constructor, I have connected here. So I would say that save, and that's the same save. What it needs to save? Whatever value comes here, take that, save it in the table. So once it gets the value, it passes it, like as you get the soccer ball or football, you shoot it to another person, and that's what it happens. It sends it here. The repository, you don't see it, but it's already implemented in the background, as I already showed, but let me repeat that one. CRUD repository Spring Boot. I think that was this one with the example. Nada, no, I don't need that one. Okay, so these are implemented behind the scene that you don't see it. So that's save. This is what we are calling here. So we are saying that save the book from me. The service comes to the repository and takes that, saves it into the database. So 3 steps: comes to the service, then goes to the book repository, runs the command, the method, and goes to the table entity and process it. So that's the create. We did the create. Let's do the read. So for read, how many books are you going to submit to the system? 1, 2, 3, 4. So each time you send one, there will be one more book in the system. And that means when you read it, there are more books to read than, like, it's save one at a time, read all of them, or you have to loop through it. And for that one, we already wrote a loop pretty much. So this one also is similar to for loop that you studied, like for loop I equals to 0, then loop until the data exists in the array list. So it's until it exists in the table. So for this, we will say public list create show me all books, get all books from where? Since we're in the service, we would always go to return. Since there's the point, once we have Java util, if you specify this one, it means that you want the data to be given back to you. So you want to get the data so you can pass it back to the front end user or to the web application to see it. When you see a void, all you say is take this data, just go with it. Take it and save it. Don't tell me what you saved. But once we use this one, it means that in addition that if it is a setter, which we will pass the data type here, we will tell it to save it, then also give us back what you saved. Or if you don't put any setters here, then it would just say like, go read all these things, return back to me what you have found. So for that, we will say like, go to book repository, find all list. So that's, let's see, did we choose it at find all list? Yeah, but we could say, let's change this one, find all books. That looks much nicer and less confusing. So now we say find all books. There we go. So now we should be, the first two part of the service is done. So there are two ways of doing the tutorial. One is to do all the services, then to go do all the controller. But I like to do one step at a time so you know which one happens first. And if there's one problem in one part of the code, you don't have to be worried about that one. So let's go to the controller and create our controller. But I do want to restart it one time to see, make sure that my services don't have any problem, because now I know how much code I have written. If there is any issue, I can fix it. So yeah, of course there is an issue. Just gonna go up, and it tells me there is an error. We run the application and we are getting a problem. It says that it can't find this find all book method inside the repository. So that means that usually you don't get a problem, and I'm not gonna spend much time troubleshooting just that part, because if I give one of these names like find all, so it should solve the problem. But sometimes these minor problems don't happen, but sometimes you create a duplicate name or something that along the application that conflicts. So for this one, I'm going to change it to find all name, and that should resolve the problem. So let's go to VS Code. I'm gonna say find all, because I know this exists there, and that's the same thing, find all with capital A. And I'm gonna save this part, then come back to save services, and I would say find all. So if I run the application this time, it should just work fine. So some of the problems are like minor things, and that's why it's good like to troubleshoot as you go, to type your code, check your code, so at the end you don't have one large problem that you have to fix each bit of the function which is connected to each other. So now it is working. So now we can create a book and we can read all the books. So let's put a comment here. This will be creating or like uploading, or yeah, uploading a book, because it will be one object at a time. And this part will be reading all books from the table. Inside table resides what? Inside the database. Well, inside the database. So let's now create something that can do these two things. So even though we don't need all these methods here, I mean, just in case in future, if someone asks you a question, do you need a service layer? But you definitely don't need it. But is it a good thing? Absolutely. And it makes your code much safer. And you can, once you do more application which has more complex calculations and stuff, this service layer helps you more to achieve different goals. So it is a best practice. It's usually, I refer to like a middleware between controller and the repositories. So now let's create our controller. That's where we can read and write all these data.